Welcome to today's live stream on 9/11 Whistleblowers by James Corbett. And in a sense, the subtitle of this documentary is But Someone Would Have Talked. This is something that Corbett keeps bringing up. And I think I would say at the outset, remember, the Manhattan Project was kept secret for 7 years by 50,000 people. So it is possible to coerce, threaten, get people on side about something so that a secret can be kept. But the point that he's making is people have talked and they've been smeared, ignored, fired, in some cases, probably killed. And it was maybe about an hour before today's stream, and someone on social media tagged me uh, for whatever reason, maybe because of the Oklahoma City stuff I've been covering lately. And it's from Kevin Ryan. And the tweet says, "Next week will be the 30th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing. Serious questions about the event continued to be ignored. Remember that 168 were killed, including 19 children, and very few people want to know the truth of what happened." Now, what's interesting is Kevin is the first person I wanted to talk about today on my outline. So I responded back on X and I said, Kevin's awesome. I'm going to be talking about him on the live stream today. And he's the first whistleblower that James talks about, and he's the first one I want to talk to you about today. He worked for a division or subsidiary of Underwriters Laboratories, UL. You'll see the UL logo on many things. But what's germane to the World Trade Center is they were responsible for the fire resistance ratings. And if you're going to make the argument that the steel failed, part of that argument has to be that the fire resistance ratings were either invalid, so UL failed in their job, or something else happened. But in any case, UL was defensive right from the beginning that, we tested the steel and that was our job. But the fire ratings that UL gave would have given a burn time of 3 hours using the material, the fire retardant material around the steel. It would have to have burned for 3 hours. But remember that the South Tower fell in 56 minutes. And remember, it was hit second. The North Tower was hit burning. It didn't collapse as fast as the South Tower hit. The South Tower was hit and was burning. And Kevin made the mistake of writing to NIST, publicizing this problem. And of course, what happens? You have to get fired. Embarrassed Underwriter Laboratories for their role in the cover-up, which is basically not saying anything, and questioning the official story as put forward by NIST. So Kevin Ryan, the first of the whistleblowers featured in this documentary. The second, Kate Jenkins, EPA official. Interesting in an era in the United States in which government employees are being fired left and right. This is someone who was just dogged at her job. She was, I'm really in admiration of her. And in some ways I wonder, is she a little crazy to want to keep her government job? But James sets it up for us by giving us a bit of background. She fought Monsanto on an Agent Orange dioxin study in which they're trying to whitewash dioxin doesn't have any bad effects. Agent Orange is perfectly fine. Pay no attention to the children dying. And she writes a memo asking for a criminal investigation of Monsanto. The agency, the EPA, apologizes to Monsanto. There are no criminal charges filed, and she gets a reduced workload. She's punished for her work on Monsanto. After 9/11, she starts asking questions, and she uses Libby, Montana, a Superfund site, as a point of reference. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the United States, or not familiar with this term Superfund, a Superfund site is a place that has exposure of harmful chemicals. And this could have been through industrial action or some kind of accident, whatever it might be. A Superfund site is designated to get special attention for cleanup and help to the residents that are nearby. So Libby, Montana was a Superfund site, and she used this as a baseline to say that Libby, Montana had 22 times less the contaminants at ground zero. She wrote memos on improper lab testing, Samples at Ground Zero were diluted thousands of times before getting tested. The White House changed EPA memos that were press releases that were going to be sent out to the press for where they said high levels of contaminants to zero. And she wrote memos to members of Congress, the general public, the press, the FBI. One of these was 134 pages long with 200 footnotes. The woman would not give up, and at some point they fired her. So I think in 2010 she's fired. If she's this hardworking to fight the truth, you would hope that she's at least that hardworking to fight for her job. She does. She gets reinstated with back pay in 2012. The agency refiles the same charges, tries to get her fired again after they just took this L. In 2018, it's confirmed all of her pay, gets her job back. But what has happened to someone who wants to tell the truth about 9/11? So someone would have talked. You have so far Kevin Ryan talking, fired. Kate Jenkins talking, fired. Barry Jennings, now we're getting to something a bit more suspicious. Barry Jennings was inside WTC 7. He worked in this command center. He goes in that morning. The office is abandoned. Apparently, Barry didn't get the memo that morning. You weren't supposed to come into WTC 7 because it was going to be demolished. He said he saw steaming coffee. He saw half-eaten sandwiches. He calls a colleague. Where is everybody? The colleague is shocked. Well, Barry, what are you doing there? Get out. And why is he telling him to get out? What, were they at a team building exercise? You missed the memo. We were at breakfast. No, he just says get out, and he hangs up. Barry then says he's trying to go down, and a stairwell underneath him blows up. There's explosions in the building. And so then he has to climb back up. And he's in WTC 7 as 1 and 2 come down. When he's finally rescued by firemen, who I think there's footage of it in the documentary. They throw something out the window to break the glass. They get the attention of some firemen. They finally do get rescued. But he gives testimony of explosions in the building, explosions inside WTC 7, which remember was brought down by office fires. He goes down. He says the lobby is a wreck. Totally destroyed, unrecognizable, and they had to break a hole somewhere in the building to get him out of the building. Barry Jennings then gets interviewed by Jason Burmis and Dylan Avery for Loose Change, which if I remember, I'll put a link in the description and a card for this when the stream is finished. I've done a review on Loose Change, and Barry Jennings is interviewed by Jason Burmis and Dylan Avery, and he talks about the explosions. He talks about being in the building. He doesn't understand how Building 7 fell. When he dies mysteriously, Dylan Avery, I think, hires a private investigator to find out what happened with Barry, what was his health problem. Private investigator digs around a little bit, comes back, gives the money back to Dylan Avery, and says, don't ever call me again. Why? Because he started digging around and found out he's not allowed to ask questions about Barry Jennings. Barry Jennings made the mistake of being an honest man who shared what happened on 9/11, and he had to be silenced. His death is very mysterious. Who do we have next? We have Michael Springman. Michael Springman, who worked for the Department of State, and had questions about visas being issued in Jeddah. Jeddah is one of the cities in Saudi Arabia. And the Jeddah embassy or consulate has a record of issuing visas to terrorists. And this was revealed to Michael later on as he sort of dug back and tried to figure out, why did I get fired? Why was this happening? And when he came in to replace his predecessor, they were complaining, oh, this person wasn't any good, and you're going to do so much better. And they wanted to push forward someone for a visa. I've talked about visas before. I've had to get visas for various reasons in my life. But when you want to go to a country that you're not a citizen of, that you don't have residence of, the country has various due diligence requirements to have you come. And those requirements ratchet up the more bad experience the country has had with your country. So, for example, New Zealand, South Korea, Japan, they have very well behaved citizens. So they have visa free access in many parts of the world, Switzerland. So they don't have to get checked by by the country and by the local authorities of that country in your country. However, if you've come from other places in which you have had many bad actors in your country, you have to pay for the sins of your fellow citizens. But that wasn't the case with the Saudis. So he refused. So Michael talks about refusing to issue a visa, and someone, this colleague of his, he doesn't name who it was, but it's just saying, well, why didn't you approve this visa? And he says, well, this person has no ties to Saudi Arabia, no ties to his home country. And so without a job, without property, without family, people think, well, you can just go to another country and disappear into the population and never come back because you don't have anything that's going to make you want to return back. So that's a classic reason to refuse a visa. So he got pressure. You need to issue these visas or else. He refused. He was eventually reassigned, and he started to come back and do some research and find out why this was. He found out that one of his successors many years later, her name was Shayna Steiger, approved 12 visas with incomplete or fraudulent information, probably because she was willing to take orders where he wasn't. And in fact, the State Department had also admitted someone named the Blind Sheikh who was on a terror watch list. And so, come to find out, these people with problematic backgrounds were being brought to the US to be trained as mujahideen to fight with the Afghanis against the Soviets. And Springman confesses in the interview that's in the documentary. He says, well, if you had told me that, I would have, at that time, my political views were such like, yeah, let's stick it to the Soviets. I'll sign off on this visa. But no one told him that. And so he was just acting like a normal functionary. I'm told this is how I approve a visa. These people are suspicious, so I'm not going to approve this visa. And we later see footage of Zbigniew Brzezinski telling the Afghanis, God is on your side. He will help you triumph against the Soviets. As if Brzezinski believes in God. But obviously cynically using the Afghanis' belief in God to help them, to encourage them in the proxy war, one of many proxy wars the U.S. fights, in this particular case in Afghanistan. The next person featured in the documentary, William Rodriguez. And this is someone I saw early on when I was finding out about 9/11. He was still speaking very prominently. He was someone who helped a lot of people get rescued that day. He was someone who had a master key. I think he was a janitor in WTC 1 and 2. And because he had a master key, he was able to unlock a lot of doors, get firefighters in, get people rescued. He got to meet President Bush. He was considered a big hero. But the way he starts a lot of his talks is by talking about what was happening for him that day. That, in fact, he was actually supposed to go in. He was going to call in sick, but he ends up there. And he's in the basement when there's a big explosion from below him. And part of a wall collapses. The sprinklers go on. He says someone wanders in. His skin is hanging off of his body. And he says a few seconds later, he hears the impact up top. Bang. And this probably lends credence to the idea of a remote controlled drone version of the aircraft, because the timing had to be right to match demolition timing, and then possibly charges up top to amplify the explosion when the drone hit. So everyone else in the chaos, you have press, you have firefighters, you have witnesses, eyewitnesses testifying to secondary explosions. You have firefighters saying when the building was coming down, it was going boom, 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 boom. Explosions, as you would see in a classic controlled demolition. There was so much concern about this that there was a commission put forward to gather the oral testimony from first responders. Turns out there were 12,000 pages of this oral testimony, which ended up getting sealed. I don't know why you'd want to seal oral testimony of a terrorist attack, but it finally gets um, unsealed, and we find out about all of these different people testifying to there being secondary explosions. Why are there secondary explosions? Because you have to weaken the beams. You have to, as you normally do in a controlled demolition, you have to simultaneously get rid of beams in order to bring it down. But in the meantime, you can do explosions prior to that to weaken different parts of the structure so that you don't have to do a massive explosion at the very end. So you do all these other explosions to get the ground ready, and then you do the final demolition, which brings the whole structure down. William Rodriguez, who was a hero, met President Bush, helped a bunch of people get rescued, he testifies at the 9/11 Commission. They ask him to do it behind closed doors. He says, I didn't know at the time. I wasn't suspicious. I just thought that's how it was. His testimony is omitted from the 9/11 Commission report. Someone who is helping people, someone who is saying that there was an explosion in the basement. And the question is, what was the purpose of the 9/11 Commission? Was the purpose to solve a crime, or was it to perpetuate a narrative? And that's what we see with the Warren Commission report. Maybe not. I haven't looked into the Challenger explosion, but I thought about the Challenger explosion because I was looking at how long it took the commission to get started, and that's the last aspect that James looks at in this documentary. Is he says the commission itself, they were whistleblowers. It took 7 days for the Warren Commission to be formed after the Kennedy assassination. It took several weeks for a commission to be formed after the Challenger explosion. It took 441 days for there to be a 9/11 commission, and only under enormous political pressure from the families. William Rodriguez talks about that. Getting the families out there, we've got widows out here, we've got fathers out here, got mothers out here, and all of a sudden the political pressure is such. But up until then, Bush had been telling Tom Daschle, who I think was Senate Majority Leader at the time, you need to slow walk this investigation about 9/11. Why is that? And who does he appoint to head the commission? Bush. Bush appoints Henry Kissinger, war criminal of war criminals. The widows do their research, and because of who they are, they get status to ask Kissinger some questions. One of the widows asks, will you release your client list, who you consult with, to find out if there's any conflicts of interest? And secondly, do you have any clients named bin Laden? Kissinger resigns the next day. So much for the experts, right? That Douglas Murray tells us you have to be an expert in order to ask questions. These women just had their husbands killed. So thankfully, they were allowed to ask questions. Gets Kissinger removed. But the commission members, 6 out of 10, James points out, 6 out of 10 commission members say the commission had been set up to fail, either through underfunding, through having a very short timeline, so they start very late, and having numerous conflicts of interest. So Corbett says, yes, people were whistleblowers. The idea that someone would have talked, people did talk, and they were fired, they were ignored, they were shunned, they were smeared, and in some cases, possibly murdered. I think it's very possible that Barry Jennings was murdered. And in the case of Kevin Ryan and Michael Springman, they were blacklisted from getting employment. I think they had to work pretty hard to find gainful employment for themselves and their family. And Kate Jenkins got fired and just kept fighting for her job, but she's a real exception. And William Rodriguez also shunned and not permitted to be a part of polite society because he dared to question the narrative. And the narrative is what is put out in the 9/11 Commission report. That is not actually what happened. It is what they need us to believe in order to justify what has been done in the name of these people who were killed on 9/11. Super chat from JM for $2. Thank you, JM. I appreciate it. I appreciate any super chat, and thank you for the support. Did you all have a chance to watch this documentary? It was a couple hours long, and as usual, James Corbett is not everybody's cup of tea. I understand that sometimes his tone can irritate people. I've heard that. It doesn't irritate me, but I do understand that it can irritate some people. But his work is not questionable. He does really good work. And if you have not seen his stuff, I can only strongly encourage you to do so. Didymus, good evening. Good evening to you. All right. Any thoughts, questions, comments on this documentary? Any general questions on 9/11? I'm happy to field. Otherwise, I'll do my usual shameless plug for Palestine Bookshelf. We'll have a stream over there in about 10 minutes. We're going to be talking about Oslo and the so-called peace process and how that whole thing came together in the first place. And it's one of those interesting things. I'm so glad that I saved learning about Oslo for much, much later in the process, because I don't think the so-called peace process doesn't make sense to you if you don't understand what the right of refugee return really means, the status of Jerusalem, what is the 1967 Green Line, where do these refugees even come from in the first place? That if you don't know about any of that, then Oslo doesn't make any sense to you. So if you're just starting to look at Palestine, I would save studies of Oslo and the so-called peace process for very late in the game. It's not something that will make sense to you beforehand. Cruz, at this point, we know the planes that hit the buildings weren't filled with passengers, right? Do we know the real fate of the hijacked planes? Cruz, great question. Let's try to break your sentence down bit by bit. Okay. So at this point, we know the planes. So I think what you mean is potentially drones. And these, when we say drones, we don't mean, little remote control drones we're talking about now. We're talking about a regular sized plane that was fitted with an autopilot that could be controlled. And you see the sort of drones we have now. Remember that the military is always way, way ahead of the game. So I find it more likely than not that you have drones rather than the actual, because of how the planes were maneuvered, and partially because they need to hit the building at a certain time, because there were probably timers or people watching on site to time the demolitions. So were they the actual planes? I think probably not. Were they filled with passengers? I don't know. Now, what's interesting is, if you look, there's numerous documentaries that point out that a lot of people on the planes that day either worked for the Defense Department or had some connection with the military industrial complex, working for Raytheon, those sorts of things. So, um, were they filled with passengers? Remember that part of this can possibly be the use of patsies. So you tell somebody they're going to do something, and then they don't realize they're acting on your behalf, and then this happens. Oh, we're just going to have a scare. We're not actually going to have anything happen, and then it actually happens. They get in a plane, they don't realize it's remote control, they can't get out of the plane, and they hit. This is what happened with the 7/7 bombers. They thought they were going to be part of a simulation. They realize what happens, they try to escape, they get killed by Canary Wharf. So if I remember, I'll try to put a link to that discussion of 7/7 ripple effect. So were they filled with passengers? Unclear to me. So unclear whether it was a drone or whether it was the real airline. Unclear whether there were passengers inside or not. Do we know the real fate of the hijacked planes? Remember, these are all just numbers. So if you say AA-11, so American Airlines 11 is the plane that hit the North Towers, the one that went first. That's the designation that the airline gave it. And so we know that that was the plane that was assigned to it. However, we weren't on that plane. So we know that something pulled back from the gate that was assigned to the airplane that was classified as American Airlines 11. But we have no idea as to whether the people actually boarded that plane, because the ostensible witnesses of it are all dead, potentially, the people who were on that plane. So I have to say a qualified I'm not sure to every part of your question. Were they planes or not? Don't know. Were they filled with passengers or not? Don't know. Do we know the real fate of the real fate of the hijacked planes? If we say that they were all drones and these planes were moved somewhere else, flown somewhere else, all you'd have to do is change the livery, sell it, whitewash the plane, pretend it wasn't an American Airlines, and then sell it to some airline that wants to buy used 737, 747s, whatever it might be, and they would have sold them on. So I think that's probably the least difficult part of your question. What's the real fate of the hijacked planes? You could easily clean up kidnapped planes and sell them. The question is, were there passengers and were these planes instead of drones? It's an interesting question. JFK's older brother died in an autopilot bomber accident. Did it miss? Fascinating. I'd never heard that. Don't know anything about that. A proto drone incident. If you know more about that in terms of a video or an article, please feel free to put that in the chat either now or after the stream is finished so that we can read a little bit more about that. No idea. But clearly, we see how sophisticated drones are today, even at the civilian level. So it wouldn't be too far-fetched to imagine that drones were much more advanced at the military level as few as 20 years ago. Any other questions on 9/11 whistleblowers or 9/11 in general? If not, we will wrap up the stream. We are heading towards Easter. We are heading towards 10,000 subscribers. Thank you for your support. That will probably have lots to talk about if and when we do get to 10,000 subs. But in the meantime, thank you for your support. Thanks for stopping by. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about Oslo, we head over to Palestine Bookshelf. I'll be on there in about 4 minutes. Last question, Cruz. Will you watch Warfare this weekend? Is this a movie, Cruz? I don't know about it. If it is a movie, in part probably because it's Lent, so I'm not watching movies, not going to sporting events. But if you could tell me a little bit more about it in the chat. YouTube pruned my chat on Operation Northwoods. It does that. It does that, and sometimes it's inconsistent. So someone will say I can't see it, and then I can see it, and I don't know whether that's because I'm in charge of the channel. It's about 2006 Iraq by A24. I'll make a note to. I'll make a note of it. I don't know about it. All right, everybody. Thank you for stopping by. And as I said, I'll see you over on Palestine Bookshelf if you'd like. But otherwise, as always, thanks for the support here.